Hello, I'm Barbara Mueller, and you are in for a treat today. You know, many of our guests have stories. Many of our guests have work that they have been doing for peace, happiness, and healthy living. That's why I started Peace Podcast, and I'm Barbara Mueller, and I'm your host. Today, you're going to find out what it is that makes CNN so irresistible. Is it their stories? You're going to find out today about Shelter Box again. And you may remember that Carrie was number 169 and she was on Peace Podcast. And when you think about her stories of impacting lives and saving families and bringing peace to people, you think about how impressive it is that she now has Paul Vercammen. Paul Vercammen, I would like to welcome you. He's the communication director for Shelter Box. He's my old friend from when he was in Santa Barbara, California, and doing the news, and moved to New York to CNN. And listen to what somebody said about him. We can always count on Paul to deliver, said CNN's Wolf Blitzer. He is solid and knows news, and his track record proves it. His breaking news reporting offered more than, let's say, acres burned in the Paradise Fire. We all know about that. He told the story of a heroic bus driver rescuing 22 children. And we had many more stories, but his story is the one that made the connection to millions. 22 children being rescued. Paul, what is the essence of your ear, eyes, nose, and throat telling the story that people want to hear? What is it about that makes your stories irresistible?
Well, I don't know if they're irresistible, but I thank you for the compliment, Barbara, and it's nice to be reconnected with you. I would say super important as I get rid of an echo here in Summerlin, California. That's why I have a halo effect over my head. It's sunny here. I was sort of trained early on in my life by my Belgian immigrant parents to tell a story because they were often recounting what they endured in World War II as little children under the Nazi occupation. So it was sort of ingrained to me that colorful storytelling was a big part of the family, and that set the table. And of course, like anybody who is seeking humanity in the world, like you were saying, I didn't want to just talk about the acreage burned in a brush fire. I wanted to find out who the heroes were. I might also report on the tragic events of that brush fire and other aspects of it. So all of this got mixed in, and I had the wonderful stroke of luck to go to Santa Barbara City College, where I had a drill sergeant of a journalism professor named Ray Canton, and he always explained to us the fundamentals is people want to read about their neighbors and themselves. And that stayed with me. And then I also would transfer to the University of Southern California, where I had more marvelous professors, including Jack Langett, who was the New York Times Saigon bureau chief. So I was blessed with an unbelievable lineup of mentors.
Mentors. That's why I started peacepodcast.org, because I wanted these mentors who are working in the peace field to show others that it took their actions that made the option of peace. It was taking action. You know, like I was telling you earlier on about how Robert was visited by Ted Turner, and Ted Turner said, I just won the America's Cup, and now what am I going to do? And Robert said, well, you know, I asked Secretary General Outant if we could have world news. And he said, but world news, Ted Turner said. And then he said, I'll do world news. And Robert said, okay, I'll give you a grant. That's how CNN got started. And here you are now talking from the point of view of a 5 Emmy Award winner, Peabody, contributing to the CNN coverage of the Gulf oil spill, etc. The Gulf oil spill, let's just go to there a moment. How can I make that relate to the neighbors and to the story that you said? Make sure that it is from them or the story relates to them.
Well, as an aside, I remember we were trying to explain how this oil spill was dramatically impacting business owners. And in this particular instance, I'm smiling because I'm sure it was a funny scene for a moment there. But I said, some of these African American owned businesses are getting obliterated because of the lack of seafood for their restaurants. And I walked into a church, and I know upper room was in the name of it, which often means heaven, if you want to have me translate. And myself and my South African white cameraman and I were the only white people to walk into the church. And we just simply asked them after the service, can anybody tell us a story that we could tell to the world about what is happening to you because of this spill? And sure enough, Andre had a wonderful Cajun restaurant and everything had gone up, including the cost of shrimp. And he didn't want to pass it on to his customers who were already suffering under the ripple effects of this oil spill. So that would be the type of technique that we would use to make sure we put a human face on the story and it wasn't just about how much goop had seeped into the Gulf of Mexico.
I love that, a human face on the story, because I think that's the stories that remain with me. I remember these stories when you put a human face on it. I'm going to put you on speaker view, and I'd like you to talk a little bit about your experience as being growing up in an immigrant family. Where's your family from, Paul?
They're from Belgium, both parents, and specifically the Limburg province, pushing toward the German border. And so early on, they were occupied by the Nazis in the invasion, and that caused tremendous hardship. Not the least of which being pulled out of school, watching people die. I had an uncle I would never meet who died of starvation. The back of the family farmhouse was blown out one day by, I believe, Stuka dive bombers. My mom was, they thought, possibly left for dead when they were scrambling around, and she was extremely ill. So they had overcome all this. They had the good stroke of fortune to have an aunt. I'm smiling because I think, it's almost a cliche, but attractive Belgian woman marries US GI, and this distant aunt had said to them for a long time, you really should pull up the tent stakes and come to America. We think you can make it here. Eventually, we would have a family of four, and our grandmother would live with us. So those are a lot of mouths to feed, and they indeed came to Santa Barbara, where the aunt had moved with the GI who she married, and the rest was history for them. They started as coat check girl and busboy at the Biltmore and Coral Casino, and then worked their way up.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. I think you're a man who has had a lot of coincidences that brought you into new situations that you saw as an opportunity. I think this is really important. So many people say, oh, that's good. What about the opportunities that that's good brings? And how do you communicate those things? I'm really going into what it felt like to come to the United States. How old were you then?
Well, I was actually born here, and I think I
Oh,
was
I see.
conceived in Belgium with my older siblings being born over there. So that makes my parents citizens after me. I'm a so-called anchor baby.
Mhm.
So they were learning
I
English
love
though, as
this.
I
You're
was.
an anchor baby. This is really important because we're
Yes.
losing some of these anchor babies that really should stay here, but that's another story. Keep
Well, it's
talking.
interesting because sometimes when I'm talking to Latino friends and whatnot, they may on the surface think that I'm an anchor baby, but especially in Santa Barbara, I'll be chatting with somebody who's a Latina. They might be fifth generation Santa Barbaran. I'm the new arrival in a sense, and I think that helped me with my global perspective, my drive to maybe get connected with international news later and not stay in local. Although I loved every minute of my time at KUIT, it pushed me in a joking way. My mom would always mispronounce it, but when my parents would work at night in the bar and restaurant, they would traditionally, as a lot of Europeans do, take a nap. And we were told to be quiet and read National Geographic. And so we would just digest all of this, and plus their stories and experiences. And many of their friends were from an international background. So that infused this innate curiosity or this sense of curiosity into me. And obviously, you're talking about opportunity that made me possibly better equipped than, let's just say, the fictitious Frank from Des Moines, who didn't have that background. So
It's dinner
eventually,
conversation.
it's
Yeah.
like a magnetic pull. I was lured. You were talking about the early start of CNN. I was lured to CNN. So in 1991, I leave KUIT to go to CNN, and I find myself, we think we're super, super advanced at the time, but we were. I was able in real time to type messages to my colleagues in Hong Kong or London.
Uh-huh. So from Santa Barbara to CNN, was that a slam dunk or did you have to go through hoops to get on CNN.
Well, like anybody else seeking a new job, I also started realizing my goals of working for an international network weren't going to be met if I continued to play on our very good, by the way, KUIT softball team and, hang out in Santa Barbara. So I began the process, sent out resumes, went through some auditions. I think I famously kind of not choked, but I had a cotton mouth from a barbecue sandwich at an audition in Texas. And I think it went very poorly because I was having a hard time getting out the words. But anyway, CNN was really where I wanted to be. And after talking to some other stations and whatnot, and going through the hoops and going through the interview and being flown back there and all that, Lou Dobbs is actually the person who hired me.
That's amazing. I look at Shelter Box and I am so proud of Carrie and I'm so proud of them being in Gaza and around the world where the stories are pretty dismal, but the home that is created by Shelter Box brings so much joy to me. And we talked earlier about Shelter Box being the result of a global grant and how it has spread and has saved lives. I remember Carrie telling the story of this woman in Gaza saying, "You came all the way from California to take care of me." And I thought that was putting a human face on what they were doing to say from California. And so I look at you and I think they were lucky to get you. That's all I can say. Did you want to come back to Santa Barbara? Is that why Shelter Box? Did they lure you back, or how did you get involved with Shelter Box?
I'm almost going to sound like my older hippie sister, but it was just sort of karma and magic confluence. I was looking for a new job. I saw myself in one vision standing in front of a courthouse at 6 a.m. And I just said, or police tape, I said, I don't want to do that anymore. I want to leverage my skill set, which was decades in journalism, to something else. And I was up for a senior reporter job at this one agency and some other jobs. And Carrie Murray and I had always stayed in touch because I'd covered Shelterbox extensively at CNN. And
Uh-huh.
one of the reasons why is I cannot stand this type of reporting, which is so and so said that so and so said that so and so said. I despise that. I was not taught that way. I'm so old school that way. You need to go right to the source who's there. And this is a true story. I go to Anderson, I say to Anderson Cooper's team, please don't report secondhand from the Poland-Ukraine border. We've got this flood of refugees passing through there at the train station. Carrie Murray of Shelterbox is there. Let's take her live instead of, this other option, which I told you is this densely layered reporting thing that I don't think really any journalist should do. And so we'd forged an alliance. And then Shelterbox actually pulled me by the shirt tail and said, could you please host an event in Carpinteria? Gladly. I loved every minute of that. And then we'd stayed connected. The stories continued because Shelterbox, frankly, was often the first in Ukraine or only in of various NGOs. And it was a seamless transition, really. And Carrie called me and I said, absolutely, that's what I want to do. It wasn't so much about Santa Barbara. Shelterbox could have been based somewhere else. But as I said, back to my joke about my hippie sister, it was just cosmic, man, that it worked out this way. And obviously, I'm smiling.
Right. You remind me of Peter, Paul, and Mary. I listen to their music over and over again because it kind of mimics the world that we were living in during their period. They're celebrating their 50th anniversary. So that's 50 years ago when they started. And I played their CD in my car so I don't forget why they said that. And they did everything from the deportees being killed over those Gatos Canyon when they were taken away from the farms where they were, pulling in the crops and putting them in boxes so I could eat raspberries from Watsonville. And that was the story. Here they were. They were in this airplane going back to Mexico, and they just had a crash over the Los Gatos Canyon. And what did they call them? Deportees. Not our food source, not our brothers, not our sisters. And I listen to people like you who tell me with heart and soul what's going on today. And with Shelter Box, look at the people behind you. Look at the children. Look at the grandparents who no longer have a place called home. And Shelter Box comes to you from California, from Summerlin. And so, you have a nose for news. That's all I can say. I don't know if that's a very good compliment, but you kind of know where the news is going to happen and how we can make Shelter Box even more relevant.
Well, that's true. And in a funny moment when I came to Shelter Box, I was glad to jump in and I said, "You are absolutely the worst braggers I've ever met. You're 100% on Charity Navigator. You've been in 100 countries. You are at the leading edge of response to so many disasters. And, let's work on getting out the information about Shelter Box. It's important. It's vital. We'd like to expand. We'd like to help more people." One of the saddest stories you would ever hear would be from one of our response team members who tells about distributing 1,200 tents in Somaliland between Ethiopia and Somalia. And he says some child, after the 1,200 tents go out, tugs on his shirt tail and says, "Where's my house?"
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't have that other tent. And
Mm-hmm.
he just has to pull his cap over his eyes as they're driving away and just sit in the car and cry. The point is, we care and we always want to have that 1,201st tent, and we're pushing to do so and get the information about it so more people join in and help out in any way they can.
Absolutely. That's such a beautiful story. There's so much that we could talk about, but it's this high impact of Shelter Box. And Carrie, when she received the United Nations Association Seventh Peace Award, and we're going to do that again September 21. And now we're going to Unite to Light. And I know Unite to Light is often in the shelter boxes so that people can see in the dark, etc. And so, Paul, we've talked about Shelter Box. We've talked about your experiences here in Santa Barbara and then moving to CNN. But who are you? Who are you, Paul? What about you has made you who you are today?
Well, I think in the end, I'm the son of Belgian immigrants. I'm a communicator. I'm a bridge builder. I like to connect people who can help each other. I love joining with you on our Rotary
Yeah.
Peace Club. It's an e-club, by the way, and that is already bringing about really positive alliances. Shanali and Carrie are going to get together for some fantastic Women's Day events. And so sometimes you're maybe not the person who is standing on stage to the roar of the crowd, but somehow you've helped to connect the people who are standing on stage with the crowd. And I think that that's something that I take tremendous pride in, that I think Malcolm Gladwell would call me a social connector.
You are. You are. And the Women's Day event this year was phenomenal. And you even said you got the fire captain from the Eaton Fire to be there. I mean, you are a connector. And I think that's part of the joy that you bring to us all. We know you've been there, done that, and you've already met the, I don't know what you want to call them, but the people who are making the news. You met them and you're telling their story. And that's a gift. That's a gift to tell a story of somebody who's doing the obvious but doesn't know how to communicate it, right?
Well, I don't know if it's a gift. I mean, I'm not going to get into some ostentatious proclamation, but the story that you're telling about is Sheila Kelleher, who was the first female fire captain in Los Angeles County to take that really important public information officer role. We used to work together all the time. And something that I think people maybe don't know is people in the forward-facing PR role and journalists will start comparing notes. And Sheila and I used to always talk about how can I possibly make your people better and how can you make my people better? So, for example, Sheila had me go out to LA County and help train firefighters in live shots, news interviews, how to prepare, what's important, how to take down notes, key facts, key figures. And then just for the fun of it, you always throw a landmine in there. And this question was asked. And I said, as if I worked for Perry Match in France, where is Cher's house? And to see if they would get rattled. Then flipped the switch. Sheila came to CNN. She sat down with us, chatted about everything from where you position yourself on a fire, What statistics are important? What does it really mean when you're talking about containment? By the way, sometimes that means absolutely nothing. You really want to pay attention to the forward advance of the fire and if there's active flanks of flame. So that was invaluable to have Sheila there. So clearly we were bonded, and I was more than happy to take her to Jitlada, the great Thai restaurant in Hollywood, and have a feast and compare notes. So fast forward, the fires hit, and Sheila's out there working her usual sleep deprivation experiment to get out the word. She is the face of the LA County Fire Department to everybody from CNN to MSNBC to Fox News. You get the idea. And the locals, because those evacuations, road closures, super crucial. Then during the Grammys, Sheila winds up announcing Beyonce's Album of the Year award. And so anyway, I was thrilled to just
You
reconnect with
did?
her.
I
And
didn't know that.
oh yeah.
And how did that happen? Was it because of you?
No, I didn't facilitate that. That would be that would be disinformation, which is another one of my pet peeves. I just want to say this real quick, and I'm going to get back to that. The reason disinformation is such a pet peeve is I did so many deep dives at CNN. Please bear in mind, so much stuff comes out of Russia every day that is complete rubbish. It's not true. They have thousands of employees who do nothing but dump disinformation into our social media channels. Okay, now that I said that,
No,
it's
that's what
like,
I was going to ask you. You know, I count on CNN to tell the truth. I know that CNN has great ways of doing that. But all this fake news that's coming in from Russia and other countries, and people are acting as if it's the truth, and then they tell me about it and they say, "Aren't you happy?" And I say, just a minute, where did that come from? And we haven't got the filters. When I was a little girl and Tide would get on the radio and they would say, "This will clean this," and that, my mother would say, "Now, Barbara, do you know that Tide can't do that?" My mother was teaching me to pay attention and know what can be done. She was teaching me at that point that advertising is not always truth telling. And so we don't know how to get our young kids to realize that some of this is just out the window and not even close to the truth. So what is your advice on that? Because this is really serious.
well, first off, do not just copy and paste before you vetted the sources. You need to try to determine where it came from and think about why. With Russians and disinformation, a lot of it is to create a sense of discourse in the United States.
And
Um, I was
chaos.
sent I was sent to Adelanto, a high desert town where they said 1,000 trucks were going to gather across the country, and it was going to be a truckers' economic protest of some sort. And to CNN's credit, a lot of times I would be sent, and it didn't mean we were going to air with anything, but they said go out there and make sure that this really isn't materializing. And my sense was, having covered Russian disinformation stuff before, that it wasn't. And there were 10 trucks there. 10 trucks, 10. That was it. Later on, they said they're going to protest the Super Bowl. I said, no way. I don't believe it. And then they traced the source of it. It was from Russia through Romania and I think Indonesia's server areas that they like to go through. So vet the source, try to gauge where it's coming from. Think about why someone would put that out. What would their motivation be? Is there a political taint on it? And make sure again that you're not just copying and pasting because it's sensational. You know, so many things pop onto the internet, are there in a blink, and it becomes viral, but it's clearly fake. There was no Russian trucker protest at the Super Bowl.
Right.
That's the kind of stuff that we're dealing with every day.
Well, you know, you really hit the nail on the head. Know the source, pay attention, don't just cut and paste. I'm with you 100%. That's why I always make sure that my guests have a history of something that would bring peace to our planet. That's why I founded Peace Podcast, because we need mentors. And so our children are not as equipped as us older people are to tell the truth and figure out what is the truth. And it's just important that you're here to help us bring peace. Paul?
Well, hang on though. Sometimes it's the 20 somethings and 30 somethings that will have a healthy dose of skepticism. And I hate to say it, Barbara, but there's a lot of 70, 60, and 50-year-olds who are copying and pasting some of this rather dangerous rhetoric, and they're not trying to discern at all where it came from. They just like the way it sounds.
Isn't that something, I don't know. Are we looking for an easy way out by cutting and pasting instead of doing the research? Or just don't send it to people if you're not sure?
Well, I think that that's actually what this whole country needs right now is a don't send it before you figure out what the heck it is that you're sending.
Yeah, and what's the point? We have enough chaos. I said the word chaos when you were talking about fake news. It creates a sense of uncertainty and a sense of unrest. And if it's this bad, what can I do? It's almost like, don't tell me anymore. I can't take it. And so I always say in these peace podcasts, if you had your magic wand, what would you want the world to know right now from your experience? And you have been with the leaders of our planet. You have been with the disasters that made me cry. And so what is it that we can do to bring peace to our planet as we look at the news and as we try to filter into our lives things that will make our lives better and help the world too?
Two-pronged here. We're talking about vetting. So vet the information. Don't copy and paste. Don't set out the blanket email. Don't post on social media. And also, how about this? Why not think about posting something positive rather than dissecting everything and shredding everything you don't like? I mean, that's sort of a mirror that you need to hold up to yourself and say, how many times am I getting in a caustic conversation and bashing somebody versus how many times I'm just celebrating the good things that are happening going on. And then on the disaster relief front, since you're asking me this, that us look at Shelter Box, look at any other nonprofits, because as you know, government agencies around the world are pulling out, and see what their impact is, what they're doing, how they're changing things. And either volunteer, you can write letters for us. You can come into the, Summerland office, become an ambassador, support us with donations, support others with donations. You don't have to give to us. Go give blood at the Red Cross, make a donation to the Red Cross, but support legitimate charities that are trying to make this planet better. And guess what? I'm sorry, but maybe you eat out one less night a month. Maybe you don't blow $115 on a mediocre meal and you save a little bit at the end of the year so you can put some wind in the sails of people like us. And one point I'd like to make, you were talking about a human face. Consider just the story of Esther. Everyone knows that Boko Haram has absolutely ravaged, annihilated, raped, beaten women in Nigeria and in the region. Esther shows up at our camp in Minnow, Cameroon, a camp that's way too big. It should never be this big, but this is how desperate the need for shelter is. And Esther gets a little sense of privacy, sense of peace, tranquility in her shelter box tent. You cannot imagine what being able to zip the flaps closed means, whether it's changing, whether it's just wanting to be calm, get some sleep. There are guards there. Esther starts to get back on her feet despite unimaginable trauma. She starts to sew for herself. She starts to sew for others. Others in the camp need clothes. And all of a sudden, there's a ripple effect here. And that's what a shelter box tent can do. I always say, if we take a 17-year-old who's on the brink of being radicalized and grabbing an automatic rifle, and we keep him with his family in a shelter, he's a lot less likely to want to go out and join that gang in some far-flung country. So please, it doesn't have to be us, but really think about how you can make an impact supporting charities around the world.
Charities and nonprofits that are doing the work to save families and human life and keep food on the table. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. I wanted to hear what we can do. And, I'll never forget when Einstein was talking and a lady came and she said, Dr. Einstein, I'm so miserable. And all I want to do is be happy. And he said, well, you know what makes you happy? Being of service. Find something where you can help another and you will be happy. And I think that's really kind of what you're saying. Don't just eat the food that you maybe worked hard to buy the food, but think about others as you are eating in a fine restaurant. Maybe you could not eat there that one night and put all your money together and and help Shelter Box. And I'm Barbara Gon-Mueller, and I hope you've got the message. Put a face on your story. Tell the story that you want people to know. Have the story resonate with your friends. I say get on Zoom and practice. Don't just get on to a news release. Here we go. Paul was talking about how he trained firemen to answer questions about the fires that they were putting out. I used to do media training, and I remember people saying, well, what do I say? And I said, well, tell the truth. Tell what you know. Speak from your own experience. And I'll never forget one of my clients, and I'm just going to tell this because it was so cute. He was so nervous because he wrote the book about people who would rather die than make a speech. And so I taught him how to not die and make a speech. I said, his book became #1 on the New York Times, a simple thing like that. Why? Because he told his story, how nervous he was. So anyway, tell your story. That's my point. And Paul is the storyteller from heaven, all I can say. And Paul, you know, you are the son of an immigrant, and you were born in the United States. You've won 5 Emmy Awards. You received the Peabody Award. I mean, you're quite a decorated hero for CNN and for now Shelter Box. And I think what I'd like to ask for in the end is, how did the family shape you?
Well, it defined me, as I was saying before, because first off, when we were very, very little, I never wanted for a thing, but I remember buying a kid a Hot Wheel for his birthday, and I gave him the Hot Wheel, and he said, this is like worth $100 because my mom and dad said you're poor. And the point is, you don't need all these things and all sorts of other stuff to make yourself happy. I learned that, fairly young. Like maybe when we were very young, my parents wound up being extremely successful later in life because they quickly figured out that people love good food and refreshments, led by maybe some nice wine or so. But the point is, it's like if you start looking for all this external gratification and these things, it's not going to make you any happier than just having a good laugh and dancing or listening to some great music or taking in a ball game with family and friends. And so family has always been extremely important to me. Close friends have always been a part of my life. And it's like, I just want to reemphasize, everybody sometimes thinks that next shiny object is going to change things. And like what you said, be of service to others, and imagine how good that feels. We responded in Altadena because it's the working class LA community, which had a great need after the LA wildfires. And if you want to get an adrenaline rush, hand an air filter, an air purifier, about a $250 air purifier, to someone who's been breathing ghastly air, and she's choking up in front of you and starting to cry. And all of a sudden, wow, you're just elevated because you know how badly she needed that filter. And so that goes to your point, Barbara. Do a little something for somebody else, and you're going to get shot through with all kinds of positivity and adrenaline, and you'll have a smile on your face from Temecula to Carpinteria.
If people want to find out more about you, I know you're on LinkedIn and on many other platforms, Facebook. What would you suggest they go? Would you want them to go to the Shelter Box website, or would you rather?
Well, I want you to do two things. I definitely want you to go to the Shelter Box website because we post a lot of interesting stories. In a way, you could look at our website as a news release, a newscast, because if you are saying Burkina Faso, what is going on there? Why are these people suddenly facing all this conflict? What are you doing about it? We've tailored our tents, for example, to a more squat tent that is weather resistant in that part of Africa. So you can learn a lot from the Shelterbox website. And then if there's any connectivity, you want to reach out to me on LinkedIn. The air filters came through a LinkedIn connection. It was somebody who remembered me from CNN. Please follow me on LinkedIn. We do post a lot of things there. And I believe that LinkedIn has become more mature. I think it has become a very useful tool. And back to that social connecting, there is a lot of really important bonding going on there.
LinkedIn is one of my favorites. And I have found that when I go to LinkedIn, people follow me. So I think,
yes, as they should.
I think that we're finding that that people want to associate with people who are doing good. And I think that you talked about, volunteering, maybe supporting the nonprofits out there that need you. And so I just think that today, I want you to watch, people who are watching today, I want you to invite 5 friends together and watch this podcast. Talk about what you can do to bring your message into the everyday life of people who need it, who could be your support team, rather than sitting around saying only 5 people like me. No, get out there and support the teams that you like, and they'll support you back. Right, Paul?
That's correct.
And so the last word I give to you, you have a last word today?
Just thank you. I'm grateful for being on your podcast, and gratitude is a great way to also feel a little bit better.
Thank you. And I'm Barbara Mueller, and I thank you for joining us again. This is number 100, and I think you're about 173 podcasts. And we have a lot of followers out there. So invite your friends and enjoy Peace Podcast. And I'll see you next week. Thank you for joining us. And if you're in Santa Barbara, September 21, we are going to have the Peace Prize, and it will be at Pascucci's restaurant. And we will be honoring Unite to Light. And Unite to Light is one of those saviors of the dark. When people are stuck with no electricity, Unite to Light is there as shelter boxes there for a home. And with Paul Vercammen, we are so lucky. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Barbara. And I should note that Unite to Light and Shelter Box have collaborated, and those lights can make all the difference in the world for somebody in a far-flung country somewhere else who really needs to see.
Just like the shelter box. Without shelter box, some people would not have a future. And I thank you for being there. And I thank you for giving your time. And I end this with a thank you for all of you. Bring peace to the world.